NRAVIOUSNESS, also simplified. It is directly connected, of course, with worldview. NRAVIOUSNESS. This is a mutual correspondence between the phenomenon that a person encounters and the evaluations of this phenomenon. Good, bad, non-determined, of no significance, it's all the same to me, and so forth. NRAVIOUSNESS is the mutual correspondence that exists in the human psyche between what a person encounters in life and the evaluations of this. Good, bad, not determined. These are the main evaluations. But there can be a lot of evaluations. If everything is basically non-determined or is of no significance, then this is NRAVIOUSNESS. If there is a lot of non-determinedness, then this is NRAVIOUSNESS. Well, not a hoot is given. It's all the same one way or the other. Now, there are many NRAVIOUS people. You ask, how do you relate to this or that? What do you feel about it? I don't know, they say. This is NRAVIOUSNESS. And NRAVIOUS has no shades, a good person or a bad one. NRAVIOUSNESS, this is bad. A person does not have the right not to have an opinion on the necessary set of phenomena. NRAVIOUSNESS is bad. But just the concept of NRAVIOUSNESS by itself, it is just a general name. Well, either NRAVIOUSNESS is a set of internal measures of a person, which is these evaluations. Naturally, NRAVIOUSNESS also takes shape in life from birth, the same as the worldview, from parents, the totality of a person's NRAVIOUS measures, particular NRAVIOUS measures in relation to these or those phenomena. If there are no NRAVIOUS standards, as it were, that is non-determined, then this is still an evaluation. This is how it works. NRAVIOUSNESS is when there has taken shape in the psyche non-determinedness in relation to most phenomena, or it is of no significance. I do not need it. It does not matter. You often hear this. I don't need it. So that means that there are already problems. And then already NRAVIOUSNESS is divided into evil NRAVIOUSNESS, objectively, that is, in accordance with this picture. Evil NRAVIOUSNESS. A person is not a criminal, but an evildoer, objectively, according to the objective criteria given from above. An evildoer means he has evil nerves. And dobro NRAVIOUSNESS. And this is already with evaluations. But again, the criteria should be objective and not some subjective invented by the people themselves. This component of the psyche is NRAVIOUSNESS. We will continue to go through the components when we have the topic human psychology. To all appearances, this will be next time. It governs everything else in the human psyche and his behavior, and sets the worldview. NRAVIOUSNESS is the main component in the human psyche. This set of NRAVIOUS standards is laid down from childhood, and it governs everything else, in behavior, in psychic activity, and health, and everything else. The more blago NRAVIOUS the person, the more dobro NRAVIOUS he is, the more support he has from above. The absolute pravious man has the full support from above, as it was in the case with Jesus Christ. Therefore God could not give him to be punished by the Roman power. This fable entered the New Testament artificially created by the owners of the New Testament, in order to later shepherd people with the help of another God. Also a separate theme. We have it described. Why? Why it was necessary. God also does not apply any repression against the evil Navias. He simply refuses to help them. Everything else that happens to them, it is they who stumble upon such evil Navias people in society. But this doesn't come from God. God forbade himself violence against anyone, either in this life or in the next, as you can understand. The Quran says that he is merciful and beneficent, but of course there is some confusion. In any case, each chapter in the Quran begins with a spell in the name of God, the merciful, the beneficent. You cannot act like a Gestapo man or something else in relation to people. He either supports dobro or he does not support evil. Supports dobro and does not support evil. And this is confirmed in the same Quran. NRAVIOUSNESS is a set of NRAVIOUS standards inherent in the algorithmics of the psyche of a personality. Any NRAVIOUS standard, as a component of NRAVIOUSNESS as a whole, functionally, is an analog of a conditional operator, which are well known to anyone who has studied computer programming. If condition A is satisfied, then perform action number 1. If condition A is not satisfied, then perform action number 2. For example, if x is greater than 2, then go to operator number 2000, otherwise to operator number 3000. If a certain algorithm is presented as a block diagram, then in the conditional operators, the sequence of operations inherent in the algorithm branches. If we look for another analogy, then the conditional operator is analogous to a railway turnout. If the railroad switch is set in one direction, the train, informational flow, goes on one track. If the railroad switch is set to another direction, the train, the informational flow, goes in the other direction. The absence of determinateness in the conditions of transition, redirection of informational flow, is analogous to a broken railroad switch, which is unable to direct the train along either of the two tracks going out from it, which usually entails a catastrophe. Accordingly, NRAVIOUSNESS is an absence of determinateness in some NRAVIOUS standards, always fraught with catastrophe. Suppose that we have the same initial data and two copies of one and the same algorithm for their processing, differing from each other only in that the conditional operators that govern informational flows, the standards with which the juxtaposition of variables is made when analyzing conditions of transitions, are set differently. For example, in one variant of the algorithm there is the condition, if x is greater than 2, then go to operator number 2000. Otherwise, to operator 3000, and in the other, if x is greater than 20, then go to operator 2000, otherwise to operator 3000. Accordingly, in these variants of one and the same algorithm, the transition to operator number 2000 will be executed only in the case that x is greater than 20. In the ranges of the values 2 smaller than x, smaller than or equal to 20, the first variant of the algorithm will direct the informational flow to operator number 2000, and the second to operator number 3000. In the range of values x smaller than or equal to 2, both variants of the algorithm will direct the informational flow to operator number 3000. It is clear that the results of processing of the same initial data, based on each of the variants of one and the same algorithm, that differ in the standards of juxtaposition in at least one of the conditional operators, will not be the same in all cases. If we return from this analogy to our two-level model of the human psyche, then NRAVIOUSNESS, as a set of NRAVIOUS standards of an individual, is functionally analogous to a set of conditional operators in any information processing algorithm. And accordingly, this analogy means that the character and results of the transformation of information in the human psyche are primarily conditioned by its NRAVIOUS standards. NRAVIOUS standards govern all informational flows in the human psyche. According to this circumstance, the wisdom of different people says, Whatever a dobrous person does is dobro. Whatever an evil person does is evil. Regardless of whether the NRAVIOUS standards governing informational flows in the psyche of the individual are in mutual congruence, or NRAVIOUSNESS as a set of NRAVIOUS standards is internally conflicted, that is, it contains incompatible with each other NRAVIOUS standards. Nonetheless, NRAVIOUSNESS in the human psyche is one. It is one and the same for the level of consciousness and for the unconscious levels of the psyche. Possessing the described above functional significance, NRAVIOUSNESS is a specific component of the worldview, and depending on how much it is realized and expressed in lexicon, it is a component of the world understanding. The NRAVIOUSNESS that is objectively characteristic of an individual is that NRAVIOUSNESS which is expressed in his real actions, and not the one which is declared by him in self-evaluations and declarations to the public. However, it should be borne in mind that due to the peculiarities of the interaction of the conscious and unconscious levels of the psyche, the individual himself can far from always consciously perceive the discrepancy between his declared and real NRAVIOUSNESS. This is one of the expressions of the internal conflictedness of NRAVIOUSNESS as a system of NRAVIOUS standards. Therefore, there are people who are sincerely convinced that their declared NRAVIOUSNESS is their real NRAVIOUSNESS, and they perceive all reproaches against them as unjustified. In this case, it is advisable to help the person to see the discrepancy between his real and declared NRAVIOUSNESS in real life situations, a participant in which he was or is. Another concept, it is called distinction. Well, in general, it boils down to what is said. God supports with distinction those who understand what is dobro and evil, and follow only dobro, and does not support those who do not understand at all. Third chapter. It is not the purpose of God to leave you in your present state till He shall separate the wicked from the good. The Quran is written in a special verse, which in general protects this book from distortion and forgery. There, one and the same thing is repeated many times in many chapters. One and the same thing is simply repeated in different words. That is, it all comes down to the fact that God helps those who do dobro and listen to Him through the language of life in the main. God speaks to man through the language of life. This is also a very serious theme. Moreover, God speaks to everyone in a language that he not only can understand, but which he must understand in his own inner language. Well, not only, through other people he can address you, through some phenomena, and so on and so forth. The being of God is not a matter of faith. This is the subject of incessantly confirmed by God in life dialogue with a person, knowledge that is showing and not proving in the character of its origin, if correlated with the methods of developing knowledge in the culture of mankind. God gives proof of his being to man on faith, and not on reason. The proof of the being of God is, in its essence, of a NRAVIOUS ethical character, and consists in the fact that the Most High answers the prayer of the one who believes him by the fact that the circumstances of his life change according to the meaning of his prayers, the more vividly and clearly, the more he himself is NRAVIOUSly pravious and responsive to God when God addresses him personally through his Sovest, the innermost inner world, through other people, through monuments of culture, or in some other way in the language of life signs. God always answers sincere, meaningful prayer, even if there are no changes in life circumstances in accordance with its meaning. Then this or that answer is given as to the question why. In this dialogue, the reason of the individual only comprehends what is given from above, introducing it into the system of his world understanding, changing his NRAVIOUSNESS and worldview in the direction of objective praviousness or in the direction of further deviation from it. In fact, the proofs of the being of God, given by him to anyone who asks, confirm the Quranic promise. And when my servants question thee concerning me, then surely I am nigh, I answer the prayer of the suppliant when he crieth unto me, so let them hear my call, and let them trust in me, in order that they may be led aright. Quran 2:186. In the 20th century, there was a documentary genius, Leni Riefenstahl. And it so happened that she lived in the Third Reich, and by strength of these circumstances, she was engaged in documentary filmmaking in the conditions of the power of the Nazi regime. The film Olympia, which was made about the 1936 Olympic Games, is considered a masterpiece and the best sports-themed film of all time. But she also made a film about the Nazi Party Congress, which took place, if I am not mistaken, in Nuremberg. The film was called Triumph of the Will. In the majority of countries, the film is banned from being shown on television, and, in some cases, the sites on the internet where it is located are also blocked, or interest in it is monitored. But nevertheless, if you watch the film, muting the soundtrack and translating the soundtrack into your own native language, if you don't speak German, then the question arises of how to retell its content. And this is where the role of lexicon in life becomes clearest. Because if the film is called The Triumph of the Will, then this is propaganda of Nazism. And if the same video sequence is characterized by the words apotheosis of willlessness and triumph of possessedness, then nothing will change in the video sequence, but by its character, it will be one of the most striking anti-fascist films. And what words to choose to characterize one and the same video sequence? What does it depend on? It depends on what is commonly called NRAVIOUSNESS. Because if we talk about what NRAVIOUSNESS is, it is the totality of our views on what is good and what is bad, which in a certain way is formed in our psyche. Moreover, NRAVIOUSNESS and Sovest are different phenomena, because NRAVIOUSNESS can be a product of Sovest, or it can be a product of the fact that Sovest is suppressed by culture, and there took place an intensive programming of the psyche in order that views on dobro and evil in an individual would be quite different from those natural ones that would have taken shape under the impact of Sovest in the stream of God's predetermination. In addition, there is such an anecdote. A boy is born into a Finnish family. He is growing, everything is fine, he is dobrous, he is caring, only one thing depresses his parents. He is silent, he does not talk. So the boy has grown up. Once they all sit down at the table, he takes a spoon, scoops up some soup and asks the question, "And why is the soup undersalted?" Everyone is shocked. "What? You can speak? Why were you silent? Everything up till now has been fine," he says. One can laugh at this anecdote, but in actual fact it is very deep and significant in its meaning, because it indicates the function that articulate speech should play in modern culture. And its task, the priority task, is for people to finally agree on NRAVIOUS standards that should unite the whole society in the stream of praviousness. And what I said about Leni Riefenstahl's film Triumph of the Will, this is precisely an indicator that NRAVIOUSNESS, it is functionally a single whole, and unites both image thinking and lexical thinking, and moreover, it unites in the psyche of a person the level of consciousness and all the unconscious levels of the psyche. And then look at how it happens in life, because you probably remember situations when you were with people close to you or close relatives, or very close friends who can be characterized by the words heartfelt friend. And in one and the same situation, without agreeing, without exchanging any words, you did something mutually complementing each other in complete silence, or the same thoughts and evaluations arose in both of you. Why? Because when there is such NRAVIOUS unity, then what is commonly called now telepathy opens up. That is, the ability to directly transfer images and melodies from one psyche to another, bypassing lexicon. That is, at the basis of everything is NRAVIOUSNESS. We were so spiritually uplifted when we heard from our president, when we heard these words from him. He said, NRAVIOUSNESS is at the basis of everything. What is NRAVIOUSNESS? You will hear almost nowhere, neither on television nor in lectures. They try to ignore this question in every possible way. NRAVIOUSNESS is a certain criteria, evaluative criteria of an individual, a specific individual in relation to this or that phenomenon with which he is faced, good, bad, or indifferent. There are three evaluations. The sum of these criteria composes NRAVIOUSNESS. What is the NRAVIOUSNESS of the individual? Such is the individual's obraz views about the world. We call this a worldview. What is the worldview of an individual? Such is his world understanding. What is his world understanding? So the chain is such: NRAVIOUSNESS, worldview, world understanding. Further, the question arises about what unites the consciousness and the unconscious levels together in the psyche. The answer to this question is simple: NRAVIOUSNESS. But the term NRAVIOUSNESS also carries some general character in modern culture. There is the concept of NRAVLessness, which is opposed to NRAVIOUSNESS. There are two other concepts, dobro NRAVIOUSNESS and mal NRAVIOUSNESS. What is behind these words? If we perceive information and algorithmics as objective categories of being, but not as a product of our self-invention, with the help of which we describe objective reality, then NRAVIOUSNESS is a set of NRAVIOUS standards. And any NRAVIOUS standard is a certain abstract situation with an evaluation of good or bad.
с оценкой хорошо-плохо.
Почему абстрактная? Реальная, жизненная.
Ну, она
In our
в
psyche,
нашей
it is
жизни, она
abstract,
абстрактная. А реальность, она
and it
обрекает
requires
в
reality
эту
when we place some
абстракцию
factual situations into this abstraction.
ситуации. Но в основе
But these
этих
abstractions can
есть
indeed be
эти
based on some concrete life examples,
жизненные
which
конкретные
then cease to be
примеры,
concrete
которые
and are abstracted, generalized.
перестают быть конкретными и абстрагируются,
And it
обобщаются.
turns out
И в
that in the
общем
process of information
получается так,
processing,
что в процессах обработки информации любой
any NRAVIOUS
нравственный
standard
стандарт
is functionally similar to the conditional jump operator in algorithms.
перехода в алгоритмах. Ну, что
What is a
такое
conditional jump operator?
перехода?
Не, мы не знаем. Вот я не знаю.
Ну, вот что такое
What is a conditional jump
пространство
operator?
перехода? Кусочек какого-то
A piece of an algorithm.
чего-то
They calculate
посчитали,
something,
получили
get a
какой-то
result,
результат, и
and it ends up in the
попадает
conditional
в
jump
область
operator.
определенного перехода. Там есть некий стандарт.
There is a certain standard there with which the incoming flow of information is in some way juxtaposed. Depending on the result of the juxtaposition, either the yes branch or the no branch is further implemented. This is a fork. The most intelligible image is a railway or a tram switch. Tram number 3 has arrived, it has to go straight according to the route, and it goes straight. Tram number 5 has arrived, according to the route it needs to turn right, and it turns right. How are these things characteristic? Let us imagine that we have a comparison condition like this. If there is a certain variable at the input, and the comparison standard is 2, possible variants are: if x is more than 2, then follow the yes branch. If x is less than 2 or equal to 2, follow the no branch. And if, in another instance of the same algorithm, instead of 2 of the standard, we put 20, what will happen? These instances of the same algorithm will produce the same results in some situations. If x is less than 2, they will give the same results. If x is more than 20, they will also give the same results. And in the range from 2 to 20, one will give out one result, and the other will give out another result. So, NRAVIOUSNESS, as a set of NRAVIOUS standards in the psyche of man, is functionally analogous to a conditional jump operator, the entire set of conditional jump operators in certain algorithmics. How is this expressed? This is expressed in the following. Among other things, it's impossible, even under hypnosis, to make a person do something that does not correspond to his NRAVIOUS standards. Therefore, talks about the 25th frame, it's some kind of special magical effect, are exaggerated. Because, in order for the 25th frame to work, its contents must correspond to the NRAVIOUSNESS of the one who is watching TV. Because otherwise, the program in which the 25th frame is embedded will cause nothing but incomprehensible irritation, since it is NRAVIOUSly unacceptable. If the 25th frame is detected, it will become clear why it's unacceptable. And here I come back to the question of 16 bits per second and 16 frames per second, from which cinematography begins. Studies have shown that the unconscious levels of the psyche are able to draw even those phases of movement that fall between the frames.
том, насколько оно мощно.
This is to the question of how powerful it is.
Также оно в состоянии
In the same way,
выявить
it's able to select the 25th frame and highlight its inconsistency
соответствие
with the general context of the video in which the 25th frame is embedded.
этот 25-й кадр вмонтирован.
Вы сказали, что даже под гипнозом, например, нельзя заставить человека совершить поступок, который противоречит его нравственности. Но тем не менее в жизни огромная куча примеров, когда у человека есть нравственные, моральные какие-то установки, но под влиянием общества, среды, какой-то ситуации, какого-то положения, какой-то неприятности, он через них перешагивает. Даже не под гипнозом.
Вот, но это показатель того,
This is an indicator that his psyche is defective.
а дефективность может
And defectiveness can be expressed in different things.
внутренний конфликтный
Internal conflicting NRAVIOUSNESS, which allows him to do this and that, depending on the circumstances.
обстоятельств. И
And another variant is an absence of will.
Отсутствие воли
The absence of will
человека
makes a person a plaything of external circumstances or other people who manipulate him.
либо других людей, которые манипулируют. Вот. Ну, а
If we
если
talk about the effects of
воздействие
hypnosis,
гипноза, допустим,
for example,
человек
if a person firmly stands on the principle,
стоит на
"Thou shalt
принципе
not
«не
kill,"
убий», то для того, чтобы
then,
он
in order for him to shoot at another person under hypnosis,
надо изменить цель.
it is necessary to change the objective. That is, in hypnosis, he must be convinced that he is not shooting at a living person, but at a target in a shooting range.
Тогда
Then the automatic systems of shooting can be activated and everything else.
это, опять же, понимаете,
But this is a question about psychotechnics.
а так, если говорить о нравственности,
And if we talk about NRAVIOUSNESS as such,
это
it really is a factor that unites everything that happens at the level of consciousness of the psyche
происходит на
and everything that happens at the unconscious levels of the psyche.
происходит на бессознательных уровнях психики.
And NRAVIOUSNESS as a set of NRAVIOUS standards makes it possible to understand what NRAVLessness is.
Возможность понять, что такое безнравственность. Безнравственность это
NRAVLessness is a person's absence of NRAVIOUS standards on any question.
по каким-либо вопросам. Если такое
If this
происходит,
happens,
то человек либо
then the person either does not know how to behave,
что
on condition that the voice of his sovist for him is nothing,
либо ведет
or behaves like others in corresponding circumstances,
в соответствии
or the motivation of his behavior is subordinated to instincts or something else.
на инстинктам или еще чему-нибудь. Ну, в общем, это не
So this is not his behavior, but behavior according to some stereotyped patterns.
Тогда вопрос, а откуда берется нравственность и кто ее формирует? И что это такое вообще-то нравственность? Вот как ее померить? Где она лежит, где она находится?
Ну, к этому мы
Well, we will get to this
доберемся,
definitely,
потому что
because everything that has been said so far does not allow us to describe the psyche of man as such.
психику личности как таковую,
But just for now, it must be taken into account at the level of some kind of intuitive general understanding,
потому что далее
because we will return to this question later, and everything will be clear.
дальше возникает вопрос о том,
Then the
что
question arises as to what dobro-nraviousness and mal-nraviousness are.
особенности нравственности.
Also, characteristic features of nraviousness,
Нравственности в данном
but the features of nraviousness in this case are understood differently,
потому что в религиозном миропонимании
because in the religious worldview, dobro and evil are objective categories.
в конкретике жизни одни и
In the
те же
concretics of
действия
life, the
могут
same
быть
actions can be both dobro and evil, depending on the accompanying circumstances.
Поэтому и добро, и зло, оно в общем
Therefore, both dobro and evil are not templates. Although, yes, life circumstances, situations can be grouped into some pluralities, and on the basis of these pluralities, some stereotyped template views on what is dobro and what is evil can be worked out.
Ну и впоследствии они
Subsequently, they find their expression in traditions and in written legislation. In the religious view, dobro and evil are objective, and they are always concrete. And the source of distinction between dobro and evil is God.
Мы так просто идем очень быстро, и получается, что нравственность раз выводите понятие, раз Бог выводите понятие, а как, чего описать, как оно влияет, откуда оно взялось и как оно взаимодействует, уже пока не описывается.
Yes, I'm not describing it yet.
Выводите кучу уже понятий и говорите, вот это так вот надо принять.
Not a bunch yet. For now, you must admit that there are not many of them. A two-level model of the psyche, consciousness and unconscious levels, the structures of which we have not yet talked about, and NRAVIOUSNESS as a factor that determines the levels of consciousness and the unconscious levels.
Ну теперь вот Бог.
Well, now in all we have four concepts.
Но Бог это очень всеобъемлющее понятие.
Yes, it is all-encompassing. But for many people in conditions of modernity, there is no God. Question: why for them is there no God? The answer is simple. Their views on objective reality is reduced to what they perceive through a standard set of senses. If they don't perceive God either visually or in any other way, then what is beyond the limits of perception is raised to the rank of non-existence. What else contributes to this? Some cultural factors contribute to this as well. We live in a culture where, for the majority, ethics is localized within the boundaries of human society. Accordingly, it is somewhat not accepted to talk about ethical issues in relation to the rest of the living creatures in nature. This is most vividly expressed in all kinds of experiments on laboratory animals for the purpose of medicine and everything else. If we proceed from the fact that ethics is not localized within the boundaries of human society, but goes beyond it, and regulates the interrelationships between carriers of reason, then this approach will immediately give rise to a different picture of the world. And note that in the pagan tradition, it is normal when the character of a folk tale or a bilina turns to the forest, to the river, to the sun, and receives some answers. To put it differently, for a pagan world understanding, ethics is not localized within society, it goes beyond its limits. In the plot of the folktale The Scarlet Flower, quite a large amount of action takes place when the heroine does not perceive the owner of this island in any way. But how is his presence expressed? In the fact that they are building a certain system of relations. When it comes to the question of the conditioning of atheism by some factors, then for atheists, their conviction that there is no God is based on the fact that they cannot grab him by the beard, figuratively speaking. Now, if an atheist could grab him by the beard, describe, dissect, and then put the skeleton and the stuffed body in a museum, then yes, we can say, yes, God did exist. And then, since his stuffed body and skeleton are in a museum, there is nothing to talk about again. And if we implement an approach that is based on the fact that ethics goes beyond the boundaries of human society, then every person can receive evidence of the existence of the Almighty. The evidence is of an ethical character, and it's concluded in the fact that the Almighty responds to an appeal to Him in accordance with the meaning of the appeal. And this is expressed in the fact that life somehow correlates with the meaning of prayers. Either what is asked for in prayers happens, or what is asked for does not happen, but God gives one to understand why it's inappropriate. And this becomes all the more vivid, the more responsive the person himself is when God addresses him through other people, either in the language of life circumstances or through his inner world. In culture, there can be belief in God. This is an alternative to the belief that there is no God. For some, the fact of the being of God is an object of belief, while for others, the fact of the non-existence of God is also an object of belief. They do not have any intelligible evidence of either, but there is a certain interpretation of the events of the present or the past, which allows one to argue this or that point of view. For a believer in God, this is the fact that there are traditions, holy scriptures, and for non-believers, there is a certain limitedness of the world perception of believers, and facts that are described in the holy scriptures, but are perceived by science as obvious stupidity. For some, they are proof that God is. For others, that God is not. He is absent. But if we turn to such a genre of literature as Lives of the Saints, regardless of which confession these saints belong to, it turns out that for them, the fact of the being of God was not an object of belief. For them, this was reliable knowledge, daily confirmed by their prayer practice, that is, communication with God. And this was expressed in the fact that life flowed in accordance with the meaning of their prayers, or they received some kind of explanation in this or that form, as to why the appeal could not be satisfied. And at the same time, the static objective laws of the natural course of events were often violated. Because when diseases that are obviously incurable at the level of development of medicine disappear, within if not a few seconds, then within a few days, and this was preceded by a prayer for healing, then convincing the person who prayed that this healing was just a coincidence is a pointless thing. But this is an answer to the question, why is religiosity ineradicable from human culture? It is ineradicable from human culture because sovest, it is an innate religious sense, which is enclosed towards the unconscious level of the psyche. In what sense enclosed? The flow of information that comes through Sovest gets into the unconscious levels of the psyche, and only from the unconscious levels of the psyche is it then brought to the level of consciousness in one form or another. In the language of an internal dialogue, in which consciousness communicates with the unconscious levels of the psyche, the dialogue which can be specific for everyone. Again, if you turn to Russian literature, then in literature until 1917, Sovest is interpreted as an innate sense that gives man an idea of what is dobro and what is evil. In the literature published after 1917, in line with the Marxist tradition, Sovest is interpreted as a culturally conditioned skill formed by upbringing. But the reality is such that Sovest is an innate sense, because if upbringing is in the initial stages, and if one attentively monitors the child's behavior, then one can see that the child has some ideas that stem from Sovest. What is the functional difference between shame and Sovest? Sovest is proactive in relation to the situation, and it obliges us to do something in it, or not to do something in it. If we ignore the voice of Sovest and do something, then later we feel ashamed.
То есть вы считаете, что совесть это как бы врожденное
Yes, this is an innate religious sense.
качество духа, да, или души?
This is a means given to the soul from above, in order that it can always decide on the questions, what is dobro and what is evil?
Она же все равно воспитывается, ведь есть очень много примеров, когда людей...
The culture is such that it suppresses both Sovest and shame. And most of the people living eliminate Sovest and shame from the algorithmics of their psyche by around adolescence. Sovest differs from all other internal voices in one single quality. It is impossible to bargain with it. If it is about one and the same situation, then no matter how intellect plays up this situation and its own role in this situation, Sovest says the same thing. And if the behavior was wrong, then anyway, Sovest will insist on the fact that it was wrong. And the facts of life will confirm, provide information that Sovest is right in its evaluations.
Это поэтому люди, когда что-то совершают, вот совесть не позволяет, но ему хочется, и он себе начинает теорию придумывать.
Да.
Я понимаю, это неправильно, но вот мне нужно вот это, понимаешь, как бы, и сам с собой договорился.
Yes, they agree with themselves and do it. And after, there is anyway shame. It is dripping, dripping, sharpening. And so it sharpens so much that the reality is such that in cultures where suicide is interpreted as a mortal sin, for which posthumous retribution is eternal hell, people under the impact of shame commit suicide. Because shame turns out to be so unbearable that even the threat of eternal hell ceases to restrain them. But in fact, man should live by love, and not out of fear of hell.
Да, но здесь есть стыд, а есть совесть. По-моему, стыд это уже общественное явление.
No, shame is not a social phenomenon.
Стыд, он тоже, с ним невозможно столковаться. Но
Shame,
функционально
you can't make a
различие
deal with
такое,
it.
что
But the
ежели
functional
совесть
difference is that if
упреждающая,
Sovest is
то
proactive,
стыд
then shame acts
после
after we
оговорки
ignore the voice of Sovest.
игнорировали голос совести. А дальше возникает
And further, there arises another
другое
concept, honor.
понятие – честь. Вот честь, она
Honor
может
can be at odds with what
расходиться
comes from Sovest and shame.
с тем, что проистекает из совести и стыда.
The concept of honor is really formed by society in the process of education, in the process of formation of culture, in the process of formation of a personality by culture.
Личности культуры. Но честь и совесть – это
But
разные
honor and
вещи.
Sovest are two
В
different
ряде
things.
случаев понятие о чести,
And in some cases, the concept of honor, formed by culture or subculture, can be directed against shame and Sovest, because we can talk about the so-called thieves' law.
Можно говорить вот о так называемом воровском законе. Там
There are
есть
concepts of
понятие
honor in it,
чести, но они далеко не
but they do not
всегда
always coincide with what
совпадают с тем,
Sovest
что
dictates.
диктует совесть. Те же
The same
понятия
concepts of caste
сословной
strata
чести
honor
в
in caste strata
сословно-кастовых
societies,
обществах, они тоже далеко не
they also do
всегда
not always
совпадают
coincide with
с
what
тем,
Sovest
что
dictates, because
диктует
otherwise
совесть,
caste
поскольку
strata
в противном
societies could not
случае
exist.
сословно-кастовое общество не могло бы существовать. Но понятие
But
о
the concepts of honor
честности
in caste strata societies are formed in such a way
в
that in
определенных
certain situations,
ситуациях
Sovest and shame are excluded from the algorithmics of the
из
psyche,
алгоритмики психики и деятельность индивида
and the activity of an honest individual, in accordance with the concepts of honor, is supported by the strata caste society.
сословно-кастовые общества. Как это
How this
происходит
happens is the concretics of the history
того
of this or that
или
strata
иного
caste society,
общества. Но
but
тем не менее,
nonetheless,
факт.
it is a
Это
fact.
одно и то же.
They are not the same things.
Можно быть честным перед самим собой,
You can be honorable in
перед
front of yourself,
определенными
in front of
идеями,
certain ideas,
но если
but if these
эти
ideas are
идеи
unpravious,
неправедны, то
then honor
честности,
will be contrary to Sovest and shame, and it will require the elimination of shame and Sovest from the algorithmics of the psyche.
алгоритмики психики. И мы живем
And
в
we live in a
обществе,
society full of
в котором
problems.
полным-полно проблем, но для
But for the
большинства
majority,
стыд и
shame and
совесть
Sovest
это
are
просто
simply
пустые
empty
слова,
words
с
with
которыми
which nothing corresponds in their
ничего не
psyche.
соотносится. Потому что
Because the natural
естественная
reaction to shame,
реакция на стыд
this is a person
это
blushing.
человек краснеет. В общем, вопрос, когда
So the
вы
question,
последний раз
when was the last
краснели от
time you
стыда,
blushed with shame,
большинство заставляет
makes
задуматься,
most think,
и в лучшем случае
and at best,
вспоминаются
episodes from
эпизоды из
childhood
детства
at the age of
года
about 3 to 5
3-5.
are recalled.
Редко кто может вспомнить эпизоды из
Hardly anyone can
подросткового
remember
возраста
episodes from
или
adolescence and
юности,
young age,
а во
and in
взрослости
adulthood,
это
this is such an
настолько
unusual
типичное
phenomenon
явление,
that
что
there is
и
nothing to
говорить
speak
не
about.
приходится. Отговорка в том смысле,
An
что
excuse in the
мы
sense that we
живем
live so
настолько правильно и
previously
хорошо,
and
что
so
нет
well there is no
причин
reason to
краснеть от
blush with
стыда,
shame,
она
is
как-то
not
не
actually confirmed by
подтверждается
social practice.
социальной практикой. Она скорее
It rather
подтверждает
confirms the saying, he
поговорку
lies and does
«грязный
not blush.
краснеет». Дальше возникает
Then there
вопрос
arises the question on the
о
collective psyche.
коллективной психике. Реальность такова, что
The reality
если
is
мы
that if we read a
читаем
text written by an
текст,
ancient author,
написанный, допустим, каким-то древним автором, и
and
вырабатывая
working
свое
out our own
решение,
decision, we
учитывая
take into
его
account his
мнение,
opinion,
то, в общем-то,
then
это
this is an
показатель
indicator that
того,
our psyche is not individual.
наша психика не индивидуальна.
Moreover, this applies to those situations when our decision, in one way or another, is influenced by the opinion of interlocutors, authors, contemporaries, some words uttered by the characters of performances or films, participants in television talk shows. There is reason to believe that humanity generates a collective psyche. If you do not limit yourself to the perception of other people, as visible with your own eyes, substantial bodies, but understand that connected with every substantial body is a certain field, biofield structure. By biofield, we understand the totality of common natural fields that a particular organism presently emits or emitted at a certain time. Then the question on biofield interaction arises. The modern technosphere gives many examples that allow us to understand how the biofield interaction of people is possible. The first condition is a match in the physical field. That is, if we have a radio receiver, then it's capable of receiving radio emission. Being able to receive radio emission is one thing, but being able to perceive information from fields is somewhat different. There must be compliance with the system of coding of information. Naturally, there should be activity of the receiver at the same time of the activity of the transmitter. The emission level should be sufficient for the receiver to perceive it, and should not be excessive, so that everything in the receiver simply burns out. If these conditions are met, then, in principle, the transmission of information at the biofield level is possible. If we talk about the information coding system, then what is it connected with? With those languages that the given carrier speaks. Moreover, with languages as with culturally conditioned, that is, articulate speech, other national languages besides the native one, some symbolic languages and specific slang languages of theories and subcultures, pan-natural languages in which information is encoded in the biosphere, including in the biological species Homo sapiens. How can a field be structured? The answer is simple. The field can be enclosed on itself, like a magnet, or there may be such a system, two magnets. The organism of a person contains fields of both the first and the second type. In addition, there are fields that either voluntarily or involuntarily can move from a state of enclosure on themselves into a state of enclosure on something in the world, external in relation to the organism of the person. Some vortex processes are somehow connected with all fields in nature. The vortices are arranged in such a way in aerodynamics, in hydrodynamics,
что вихрь может быть
that a vortex can be
сам по
enclosed on
себе,
itself, like smoke rings.
как вот колечки дыма, это кольцевой вихрь.
This is a ring-shaped
Или
vortex.
если вихрь разума,
Or if the vortex is
то
open,
границы
then
начала
its end and
должны
beginning
опираться на какие-то
must be based on some inhomogeneity or the boundaries of two environments,
или iные
or
вехи,
heterogeneity in the
границы
environment
которых
itself,
нет, либо
like a tornado.
неопределенности в самой среде, как смерч. Начало на
The
водной
beginning is on the water
поверхности,
surface or on the land. And
а
where is the end of a tornado?
смерч.
В атмосфере.
В атмосфере, но там, где есть
In the atmosphere.
какие-то
But where there are some
атмосферные
atmospheric
неопределенности,
inhomogeneities.
прежде всего температурный скачок, области
First of all,
плотности
the
и
temperature jump of the area, the density or the area where the ring-shaped vortices dominate.
Вот. Ну, в общем, вихри...
So, vortex is arranged like this.
вихри это
Yes, a vortex is an energy system that takes energy from the environment.
из окружающей среды. И
Moreover, the atmosphere that is oversaturated with energy tends to generate vortices.
торнадо не бывают там,
Tornadoes do not occur when the atmosphere is cold, or they occur very seldom.
это зона смерчи и торнадо.
And the tropics are a zone of tornadoes and whirlwinds.
Когда торнадо
When a tornado converts thermal energy into mechanical energy, the temperature of the atmosphere decreases.
Поэтому,
Therefore, when vortices, vortex systems of fields are enclosed on each other, or on a certain commonality,
друг на друга,
it turns out that any individual psyche is a fragment of a certain collective psyche. There is nothing new about it. Since ancient times, occult traditions have been speaking about egregors.
В этом нет ничего нового. Оккультные традиции издревле повествуют.
In Latin terminology, there is a pair, individual and egregor.
Пара индивид и эгрегор. Индивид дословно
Individual is literally translated as indivisible,
а эгрегор
and egregor is a word with the same root with the word aggregate,
неких функционально специализированных
that is, the assembly of some functionally specialized elements into a certain integrity.
В русском языке есть
That is,
особенность. В русском
there is nothing
языке, в
new.
общем, довольно мало
In the
обобщений.
Russian language, there is a peculiarity. In the Russian language, there are very few generalizing words.
На Западе
That is,
характеризуется
what in the West is characterized by one word, egregor, in Russian is characterized by many words that can be correlated with a certain typology of egregors.
с определенной типологией эгрегоров. Ну, вот
Соборность,
стадность,
herdness, packness,
стайность. Вот если все
all these are generated by people varieties of egregors.
порождают люди. Но общего слова в русском
But there is no common word in the Russian language. Somehow it is not recalled.
Но тем не менее вот эгрегоры
But nonetheless, egregors exist.
И эгрегоры представляют из себя
Egregors represent themselves as a collection of living people and the biofield bodies of egregors.
То есть полевая структура, с которой
That is,
на уровне
a field structure with which every living person interacts at the biofield level.
как взаимодействуют.
How does he interact? He interacts in different ways
Взаимодействуют по-разному, потому что
because the NRAVIOUS standards that are inherent to a person
для личности
enable him to enter some egregors
позволяют
and do not enable him to enter other egregors.
позволяют входить в другие эгрегоры. Мы тут часто бьемся,
We often discuss the theme of who is Russian.
кто русский. А если задавать
And if we pose a question on the fact that there exists such an egregor as the Russian spirit,
то практика показывает,
then practice shows that in the majority of everyday situations, the majority of those who are convinced that they are truly Russian, the egregor by the name of Russian spirit closes access to them.
себя закрывает. По той простой
For
причине,
the simple reason that the NRAVIOUSNESS of those who are convinced of their Russianness does not correspond to what this egregor requires, what was originally embedded in it. That is, the biofield body of this egregor exists, in general, independently of the majority of those who consider themselves Russian. But if the NRAVIOUS standards correspond to it, then in it there turn out to be those who by the majority are not considered to be Russian.
Can you change your NRAVIOUSNESS by will? Or does NRAVIOUSNESS direct the regulation of will? How, by will, from the level of consciousness I want, can I change my wish list? How to understand the change in your NRAVIOUSNESS? Did it happen or not?
Well, how to understand? The first question is that we cannot simultaneously do something and control ourselves. Either we control, rethink, or put our conscious head into a certain action and it is completed. Nevertheless, we can be an observer and evaluator of our behavior in the past, our intentions for the future, and we can do this in the present. And if we understand that NRAVIOUSNESS governs everything and we have done something, then it is either directly the vices of our NRAVIOUSNESS, or some vices of our NRAVIOUSNESS were expressed indirectly through some actions. And if we set ourselves the assertion that it was done badly, and this should not be done, then the next question is, why did we do it? What did we in fact want? That is it our malicious intent, or is it our mistake? Which, as it is known, there is such an opinion that a mistake is worse than a crime. But a mistake is also programmed by our NRAVIOUSNESS. Therefore, if we are engaged in self-digging, then we can get to some kind of NRAVIOUS standards, which are expressed in our wrong behavior, some worldview mistakes. Then we tell ourselves that this is not right, the correct approach to this question is such and such, and in the future we must be guided by this. Nevertheless, if the wrong algorithmic still remains active, then we should say to ourselves, hush, every time our sophist tells us that this is something that should not be. All the same, you should study yourself, your NRAVIOUSNESS, your worldview, so that unpravious desires do not arise in you, to say nothing of them being realized. Next.
Viktor Yefimov said that NRAVIOUSNESS generates everything, including in the economy, in life. What generates NRAVIOUSNESS itself?
Sophist. If we suppress our sophist in early childhood, then we begin to artificially form NRAVIOUSNESS in accordance with the traditions of society. Then we get Hitlerites and others like that.
What is the kingdom of God on earth? Is it possible to get out of it, or only to enter it?
The kingdom of God on earth is when everyone lives according to sophist.